Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. John Gerber is a teacher, scholar, author, and humanist. His career at Iowa earned him the reputation of a teacher of teachers, professional leader. He and his wife Peggy came to Iowa City in 1944, planning to stay just a few years. 32 years later, he retired due to a mandatory age requirement. During his time at Iowa, he chaired the Department of English for 15 years. Declining a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1976, he accepted the chair of the English Department at the University of New York in Albany. Retiring for the second time in 1984, Gerber then returned to the University of Iowa to be the coordinator of the Center for Fine Arts. John received his BA and MA at the University of Pittsburgh and his PhD at the University of Chicago. Professor Gerber influenced many professional organizations. He edited and wrote about teaching methods and American literature. His special interest is Mark Twain. His honors are numerous, but I'd like to just mention a few. He won the Founders Award. He has an honorary Doctor of Letters degree from Morningside College. Festschrift, American Humor, published in 1977. A legislative resolution of commendation from the state of New York, and a citation by Governor Mario Cuomo for lifelong devotion to academic excellence. At the University of Iowa, a Gerber Award for Excellence in undergraduate teaching is given annually by the Department of English, and the faculty of the Department of English dedicated a lounge bearing his name. His professional affiliations are numerous, and I'm going to just mention a few of these. He was the founder and president of the Association of Departments of English, president and founder of the Conference on College Composition and Communication, president of the National Council of Teachers of English. He's lectured at foreign universities and has held visiting professorships throughout the U.S. John and his wife Peggy raised two daughters in Iowa City, Barbara and Ann. He is the grandfather of three and a great-grandfather of two. Welcome, Professor Gerber, to One of a Kind.
Well, thank you.
I know your story begins in 1908 in New Waterford, Ohio, and then your family moved on to Pennsylvania when you were a young boy, correct?
Well, the fact is they took me over to Ohio to be born.
Oh.
My father and mother were living in Pittsburgh, but my mother wanted to have the old family doctor preside at the affair. He almost killed her, but somehow I got through. And that's the reason on all the blanks that I've had to fill out, I've had to say, born in New Waterford, Ohio, though I haven't spent more than several weeks in New Waterford, Ohio.
You really grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
In a small town, you went to a one-room schoolhouse. Tell me about your early memories of this period.
My father was an engineer, mechanical and civil engineer for a suburban line that went from Pittsburgh to Newcastle and Harmony, Oil City, and such places. So he bought a house out in a little place called Highland. Ours was about the only house there, up on the top of a hill. We were hit by lightning every year, and I grew up being rather familiar with lightning and ultimately not at all afraid of it. There was no electricity there then, but my father had electricity put into the house, and then the outlets were capped. And when the house was hit by lightning, all those caps blew off. There was a terrific
Pretty
jank.
exciting as a young boy to have that happen.
That would happen often when I was being put to sleep, taking a nap. and I certainly woke up.
You have a younger brother. You had a younger brother, correct? 7 years younger than you, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and happily he died when he was 18.
In an accident? Or did he get ill?
No, that was the unhappy part of it. It was blood poisoning that would have been picked up right away now, and nothing more would have been thought of it. And it killed him. It took him in a couple of days.
What made your family move from the small rural area where you went to this one-room schoolhouse to the big move to Pittsburgh?
Primarily, I guess, because they felt their children weren't getting educated very well. And this one-room schoolhouse was almost exactly a duplicate of the one described in Tom Sawyer. Every detail. I think that many of the schools were built from the same pattern.
Where was the stove that heated?
There
Where
was indeed.
In the middle? Was it in the middle?
Well, sort of to the middle and side, and it was, as Mark Twain says, when you were near it, you were boiling, and when you were far away, you were freezing. But the teacher, of course, could give you only a short time. There were 8 grades and about 25 students. So there were 2 or 3 to a grade. And those that she was calling upon would have to go up front. The rest would presumably study in the back, but there wasn't a great deal of studying that went on.
So your father moved his family to a larger school. That was a hard move, I read, for you, was it, going to a large school?
Yes, it was. We went to a big school in Pittsburgh where there were more in one class than the other school that I had in the whole school. And I was very lonely, of course.
And shy? Were you shy?
Beg pardon?
Were you shy?
Yes, very. Of course, I'd been brought up by myself, really. The teachers didn't help. They wanted to be friendly. This one teacher would sit down beside me and put her arm around me. Well, that was the worst thing that was god awful as far as the other students were concerned.
You paid for that, didn't you?
It's recess. I would get a teacher's pet, you know.
Yeah, exactly, which is the worst thing to be labeled as a teacher's pet in grade school. Because of your loneliness, did this turn your attention to books? Did you start reading a lot as a youngster?
Well, it was partly that, but then my parents already had gotten me used to reading books or wanting to read books, and so that was no problem.
And you, after high school, you went to the University of Pittsburgh, correct?
Yes.
And you played, I heard you played in the band there. Tell me about this.
Well, those who have seen bands, college bands today, have no idea what this was like. I got into the band because they needed an 8th trombone for the front line. I played 3rd trombone. And we rehearsed a half hour before we went into the stadium. That was all. And all we could do was to march into the stadium, turn around, come back, and then leave for our seats. But sometimes I couldn't even do that. I remember once what we would do, which was the height of our accomplishment, was to spell out P-I-T-T. Fit. But once we got a little mixed up, and it came out T-I-T-T. And I was wondering why the crowd was in such an uproar and how they were cheering us. They'd never done that before. And it got into the papers, of course.
You were famous. Your band was famous.
Yes. Well, there were other things like that would happen. But it was fun.
When did you play under the baton of John Philip Sousa?
Well, that was the first year I was in the band. No, that was when I was in the high school band, the Allegheny High School band. John Philip Sousa came to Pittsburgh every now and then and put on a concert. And what he would do would be to direct the best high school band in Pittsburgh, the one that declared the best. So our high school band was declared the best, and between halves of his concert, we marched up on the stage. It was, of course, a great thrill. But then we got there, and we didn't know what to do. He hadn't told us what he would do. He just came up on the stage and took the baton and started moving it down here. Well, the people in the front row of the band saw this and decided maybe that meant that they were supposed to play. And the first row started to play, and slowly the second, oh, it was awful. We got together about the end of the piece.
That's a wonderful story. Oh, you've had some great stories with your trombone. When did you decide in college to take this great trip across the United States in the Model T, the marvelous Model T?
Well, that was in 1928. There were two of us that were working at a YMCA, and we got this idea that we ought to spend the summer going across the country. The problem was, of course, to get our parents to agree. I was 20 and the other chap was 17. And this in 1928 was quite an expedition. Well, we were helped by the fact that there was going to be an international Sunday school convention in Los Angeles. And both parents were much interested in it, and their sons going to Sunday school and that sort of thing. And here we had them, you see.
Oh, great selling.
Yeah.
Great selling card.
They couldn't turn us down when we wanted to do such a wonderful thing.
Not these two pious boys who were going to go to California.
So with great reluctance, they said that we could go, and then the problem was money. We bought a Model T for $75. It was a 1922 model. And we ended up selling it for $50, so.
Not bad.
But.
How many flat tires did you have?
Well, this is my actual count, 45.
Gosh. 45 flats. $75 Model T, and I read that you went like around 12,000 miles round trip. Mm-hmm. But I think the story about the apple, using apples to fix your car, was quite clever.
Uh-huh. That happened up in the state of Washington, and the car got very hot, as it frequently did. And this day it got particularly hot coming over the middle of the state of Washington, which is largely orchard country. And finally it got so hot that the cup on the radiator, the solder melted, and the thing on the radiator just fell off. And so there we were with the radiator, the great big hole, with the water bubbling up, you know, and the water didn't last very long that way. So the only thing we could think of was to borrow, so to speak, some apples that were growing along the way, and which we did, and then we'd put an apple on the hole. And then pretty soon, as you might suspect, it started to cook. And the apple went down in the radiator. Well, we used up about 6 apples before we got to a garage. We took the car into the garage. Of course, it was all stuffed up with apples. I said to the garage man, I think you'll find that the radiator, a little stuffed up. And he said, oh, we'll fix that. So he got a hose and put the hose into the top of the radiator, turned on some water, nothing much happened. Turned it on some more, nothing happened. So finally, he put it on full blast. Pretty soon, down at the bottom of the radiator, there was a little ooze that started to come out. And he took a look at it rather quizzically and got down on his knees and reached under the car and got this stuff on his hand, and he got up and smelled it, and he said, well, I'll be darned. If I didn't know better, I would say this is applesauce.
Did you put that in your book, Oh Marvelous Model T?
Yes.
That you wrote? Oh, that's a great story. I want to move on. After you got your BA and MA, you taught English for about 6 years before you decided to go for your PhD. And this took you to the University of Chicago. And this is where you met your wife, Peggy. Is that correct?
Yes, she spent a summer in the men's dormitory.
Oh, there must be a story in this.
That's an introduction. She was sent up there for a special program, and the people in the program were given a unit in the men's dormitory, though they were all women. But they ate in our they ate in our dining room. And she was put at a table where I was one evening. And happily for me, I was all dressed up because we were going to a wedding. And here I was all spiffy, and she was put there, and the clothes made something of an impression. I didn't, but the clothes did.
The clothes did. Make a man.
And so that was the way we were introduced.
What brought you to Iowa, Professor Gerber?
Well, I had my PhD at Chicago, but I couldn't stay there. They didn't keep their own PhDs, and so they were helping me to look for a place. And a Mr. Mabee and a Mr. Maxwell from the University of Iowa came up looking for someone to take charge of the writing program, a new program that had just been established. And I had been more or less directing the writing program at the University of Chicago, and so the Chicago people got me introduced, and I was invited down to Iowa City by these men. And well, that's the way I got there. I liked them, and I liked the place, and then they invited Peggy down, and she wasn't quite so appreciative.
Why? Where did she grow up? Where did Peggy grow up?
Oh, in Morgantown, West Virginia. But she had just spent a year or two in New York City at Columbia. And for Columbia to Iowa City was a little break.
That was a stretch, wasn't it? I'm curious, what was your starting salary? Do you remember what it was?
Here it was
is it around
$3,000? Yeah, that was a matter of some concern because they originally offered me $2,700. Well, I was making that at Chicago, and I wrote to Mr. Maxwell and said, "Well, couldn't you make it $3,000?" And I didn't hear from him. Didn't hear from him for a month. Peggy and I talked it over and over. Decided I'd been imprudent and asking for more. So I wrote him, and he said, "Oh, didn't I tell you? Are you sure?" We accepted that right away. Here we'd been dying.
That month was a long month for you.
It was indeed.
Well, tell me, when you came here over your 30 plus years, you were an author, you were a teacher, administrator. Did you have one area that meant the most to you, or was it all of the part of the mix for you? Did you have a favorite hat that you wore?
No, it was sort of a mix of everything. It was nice being here because although I had to take charge of freshman English, they let me take a graduate course in American literature, and generally, if I wanted to do something, I was pretty much allowed to do it. Mr. Maxwell was very good in that regard.
Tell me about your love of Mark Twain. I know you've written about him and you've studied him. Why do you like Mark Twain so much and his writings?
Well, let me lead up to that one.
Okay.
Because I came here without any idea of doing anything with Mark Twain. I'd written my dissertation on Ralph Waldo Emerson. And when I got here, Bartholomew Crawford, the senior professor, was in charge of all the Emerson material. Well, as a young assistant professor, I couldn't walk in and say I'm going to take over Emerson. So I moved up a generation and started working on Mark Twain, and decided I liked that better than continuing to work on Emerson. And nobody else was doing Mark Twain at that point, so I had sort of a free hand, which was very nice for a young assistant professor. And they were generous that way, and very helpful. All of them were. There's a very unusual faculty here, in the sense that they were very serious about what they were doing, but always friendly and helpful, not only to the students, but to the younger faculty. Maxwell and others had put together an astonishingly agreeable staff. And it remained agreeable till, well, for quite a while. And then they got into a big scramble, and there was a big scuffle because of Forster, Norman Forster. They brought him on as director of school letters, and that made him above Maxwell and put him in charge, really, of the English department. And he was determined to make the department into a kind of semi-religious organization. He thought that that English had an unusual opportunity in the sense that it was a subject that gave people a chance to think about philosophy and the theology and everything except English, which upset the rest of the department. And so there was this big uproar for the whole time that Forster was here.
Were you still here, or were you back in New York?
Oh no, I was still here.
Still here.
This happened in the 30s. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it started before I got here.
I want to finish up about, if we can, about Mark Twain.
Yeah.
What is the staying power of Mark Twain? Why do people read and reread books like Huckleberry Finn?
Well, you know, that's still being argued.
Yes, that's right. In the press with Jane Smiley. That's right.
That's right. Well, this is in spite of the fact that Huckleberry Finn is a broken-backed book. That is the beginning of it, where you're concentrating on Tom Sawyer. Well, it's interesting and funny and so on, but not very powerful. And at the end, Tom Sawyer comes back in and it sort of lets down. It's the middle part that everybody thinks about when Huck and Jim are going down the river and talking about life, and it's here where the boat becomes really profound without seeming to do it. And it still remains funny, of course, and you're sort of seduced into thinking about things.
These great issues about what gives life meaning.
Yes, and of course, not all of these books are that good. In fact, none of the other books is that good.
That's your favorite of his.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides your Mark Twain writings, and you co-authored a pictorial history of the University of Iowa and history of the teaching of English at the University of Iowa, Volume 1. You wrote one-act farces and dozens of lampoons. Who played in these? Who are you writing for?
Well, it was a local group. The Van Allens and the Boyds and people we knew socially. And I did this just as a social venture, and they enjoyed it apparently. And so we did about one a year for 8 or 9 years. We overdid ourselves. We unionized, so to speak, because we took it out of basements and into the union.
Oh.
Which cost us something. And then we got an audience and so on. It became a big thing, so to speak. That was more than we bargained for, and that was the last time we did it.
That was the last time. And then I read back when you were working at the YMCA that you wrote some plays for the young kids to act, and got royalties over the years until about a year ago. That's wonderful.
Well, the reason for that wasn't the value of the plays. It was they were for groups of boys, and there weren't many plays or any plays for that kind of that kind of acting group. So in desperation, people would take my plays. And they were rather fun, but
they were humorous.
Oh yeah,
always humorous.
Farce, yeah.
Farce,
absolutely.
My last question is, besides your professional work, you raised 2 lovely daughters in Iowa City. Tell me where they are, Barbara and Ann.
Barbara and Ann. Well, Barbara, at this very moment, is moving in Des Moines from one building to my house to the one right next door. And why, I'm not quite sure, except it has a better basement.
Good reason.
But she is an attorney with one of the large legal firms in Des Moines. And the girls are quite different. Barbara, I don't know, I always forget which side of the brain operates which way, but Barbara is the analytic type, and so she's a lawyer, and Ann is the artistic type, and she's done some artistic work. Her time recently has been taken up primarily with her family, but she lives in northern California, so that they are quite different, but in their way, quite nice.
You know, when you retired here at Iowa, you had another career. You went off to State University of New York in Albany, and you declined to Guggenheim at that time. Was that a difficult decision to say, no, I'm not going to take it, and then go?
Oh yeah, that was that's sort of the thing one had in the back of his mind always. It'd be nice to have a Guggenheim, and I got it just at the same time. I got this offer from the University at Albany. It was an unusual offer. They'd been having a terrible time, and their department had been split up terribly. And they had an outside group come in to tell them what to do, and this group said, well, what you need is a chairman, not a young person, but a person who's just retiring, who knows what can be done. So they invited me to Albany, and this seemed sort of tantalizing. Besides, Albany is a wonderful place because it's so close to the various mountain ranges and you can get to Boston or New York very easily. And of course, Peggy's eyes just sparkled at this
Getting close to New York.
She had been in New York for a while. So I guess it wasn't too much of a problem.
So at 68, you went off on another career. I'm so glad you came back a decade later.
Well, thank you.
And that was a lovely gift you and your wife gave to the university with a wonderful Hancher curtain. What a wonderful legacy
Well,
that
thanks.
is. So thank you for being my guest on One of a Kind, Professor Gerber.
Very nice. Thank you.
My guest on One of a Kind has been English professor John Gerber. A gentle and thoughtful man, John influenced many students, colleagues, and friends. Known as an excellent listener with a sense of openness and vision, his reputation as chair of the English department at the University of Iowa is outstanding. His successor as department chair, Professor Lloyd Jones, commented on John's legacy, and I quote, "The way English is taught in the U.S. shows the imprint of this one person. I can't think of any other one person in the country who has had as much effect on the total direction of the teaching of English as he has." End quote. That's quite a legacy. John Gerber is one of a kind.